Welcome to Creative Piecemeal Podcast, a podcast for creatives. I'm your host, Tammy Takeishi. Join me for compelling conversations with artists, actors, authors, musicians, and other creatives about the impact of the creative and fine arts in their lives and our ever-changing world. Thank you for listening. Hello, and welcome to Creative Piecemeal Podcast. Today I'm joined by one of my besties. Her name is Elizabeth Szubert. She is a writer, an amazing friend, and all-around creative, and I'm really excited to have her on the show. Welcome.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Yay! This is the first time we've gotten to do anything like this, even though we've had so many book chats. Now it's like official.
Yeah, now this is the official meeting of the minds book chat for the podcast type thing.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. So we're going to start with what or who inspired you to become a writer?
So, and this is going to be kind of odd because I'm very much a fantasy, sci-fi, all that other type of writer, but it was really John Irving's Prayer for Owen Meany, which a lot of people talk about when you're studying writing, the opening line of that book. Because the opening, and I can't say it off the top of my head, I'm not that great. I mean, I love it, but I also can't memorize stuff. But it's just, it was really the book that I sat down and I read it. And when I was done, I was like, I want to be a writer. Like, I want to do this. And I'm not sure if, I know it wasn't like the first big serious adult book I read, but it was just really the one that touched me the most. If I like think about, the first serious adult type book I read, I think it's like Stephen King's Firestarter. But yeah, no, it was really John Irving, and he's a literary writer. He's something that is very much realistic. Well, some Prayer for Owen Meany is very much realism with like, there's some, I'm not even sure if I could call it fantastical. You're going to have to read the book in order to find out because I don't want to give spoilers. But yeah, that was it.
Do you reread that book or other similar books that have inspired you like over and over again? Or do you like to just keep reading new stuff?
Oh no, I reread. I am a big rereader, and I'm also someone who does the Goodreads reading challenge, and I count rereads. Even if I do it in the same year, I'm just like, nope, I'm counting that. I have read that book again. I have spent the time, but so I'm going to count it. But yeah, I always reread. I think it was last year or the year before, I was very much in the mindset of rereading The Martian over and over again. And it's kind of funny, but The Martian has kind of helped me hone in my dialogue a little bit, especially swearing type dialogue, because there's so much swearing in that book sometimes. But yeah, no, I am a big reader. And I think that, especially if you're in a reading slump, go back to your favorite book and reread it. Even if it's just like a short little novella, go back and reread it. You'll feel so much better. And then you can get on to that next big book you want to read.
That is really great advice, because I think everyone, no matter how creative they are or how much they love to read, gets into a slump.
Oh, yeah. I get into slumps a lot. I freely admit that, especially when it comes to reading. Like right now, I consider myself in a reading slump. And so I'm rereading, it's fan fiction. And I do highly support the reading and writing of fan fiction because I think that is a great creative tool. But yeah, so, I can feel myself slowly emerging from my slump to go read something else. So that's nice.
When I was in my reading slump, there's this author who I really love, and I was blessed to have her on the podcast. I think about a year ago or so. And her name's Catherine Center, and she writes like love stories, but she also writes just really uplifting, and they're just and funny. Some of them have been made into movies on Netflix and things like that. And I can pick up any of her books, read them or reread them, and like binge them. I usually end up always binging them, and it always gets me out of a slump or just puts me in a better mood, even if I'm not quite ready to like you said, read that next book on my
Yeah.
TBR list.
Yeah. And sometimes when I want kind of like a hug in a book, I will go to Red, White, and Royal Blue, because that is like my romantic comedy meets West Wing meets just adorableness wrapped in this great presentation of a book. So yeah,
Did they make that into a movie, or is that in production?
they did make it into a movie. I have not seen it yet. It's on my ever-growing list of to be watched. I have it to be read, I have it to be watched, I have it to be listened. Create and generate those lists, because in all truth, it's like it's great to have those lists, because sometimes when I'm floundering, I'm like, let me go to one of my lists and figure out what I was supposed to be doing. Like, I would have totally missed Taylor Swift 1989 re-release coming out if I had not written it down. And that has been one of my auto re-listens for the last couple of weeks now, because it's just so happy.
It is very happy. I do have a small CD collection, and I happen to have her original 1989. I don't have the re-release yet, but I have listened to it on various streaming apps, and it's nice. It's nice to listen to. So
it would be interesting to hear your thoughts about it, like with the 1989 back then and now, because I swear her voice sounds so much better with the re-release, because, time passes, people change, their voices grow, it's like, but it's kind of interesting that even I, who does not have your trained ear, can be like, there's something different, and I really like this. So yeah.
It's interesting that you mentioned that, because for female vocalists, their voices start to mature when they're in their 30s. So
that's interesting.
Yeah, like late 20s, early 30s, that's when the voice really, I don't know if settles is the right word, but just sort of grows into itself, I guess. Yeah, pretty interesting.
Yeah, it is kind of like, I'm just kind of sitting here going, that explains a lot.
Yeah, and it's not to say that younger artists don't sing well or don't,
No.
It's just that's just sort of, it's just when the voice matures.
Yeah, it just, our bodies change, and the voice is something that also changes. Yeah, definitely, because there are some awesome younger artists out there right now. Can I name any of them? No, but when I hear their song randomly come up when I'm streaming music or I'm listening to the radio, I'm like, oh yeah, this is good. Who's this? And I realize that, it's someone who's half my age, and I'm like, this is good. So
yeah. You do read a lot, which is
yes.
awesome. But what is a book that you've read that challenged you? And whether it was challenging you in the sense that it was hard to get through, or challenged you in your beliefs and ideologies, or just challenged you from a writing perspective? Any of those? Any, all, none?
I feel like there was a book earlier this year that I read, and now I'm going to pull up my Goodreads. And this is the other reason why I'm very much use your list, because then when like somebody asks you something like this, you can have it, but even if don't, so you can like go back and look at it. So I recently read Spinning Silver by Naomi Novik, and this was challenging to me, not at the beginning or the end, and this was a very recent read. I know it's been out for forever, but this was a very recent read for me, and the middle challenged me, and it took a while to kind of sit and realize that this discomfort that I was not really discomfort, but the annoyance from the characters that I was getting was trying to teach me something. And it was basically teaching me, don't do this in your own writing. You are uncomfortable with this because you do not want to write this way. And you do not want to come off like this to your readers. So that is one of like the really most recent books that I read that really challenged me. And it was because it was trying to teach me something. And when I was reading it for enjoyment. I wasn't really reading it to like be taught something or like for analysis or anything like that. So it really took finishing the book, setting it aside, and thinking, why did this annoy me so much? And I do that a lot with books that, for lack of better terms, annoy me. Like there was something off. And with that one, it was really just, you don't want to do that in your own writing. So I think what I'm trying to say is that for people, like when you get finished with the book and you're just like, I did not like that, sit for a moment and think why. it might be trying to tell you something. It might be trying to tell you that, hey, I don't want people who think like that in my life. Or for me, I don't want to write like that. But that was like just the most recent example that I saw on my list that I was like, yeah, I didn't like that. And also, a thing that challenges me all over the place, it doesn't matter which book I am reading. Unreliable narrators are the bane of my existence.
Oh,
And
really?
yes, and I noticed because I was scanning through real quick, I have read a couple of books this year where there has been an unreliable narrator. And I understand the appeal of them. I understand that people may think that it makes thrillers like better or something, but for me personally, I don't like it. And I think it's because I feel like I'm being lied to with the unreliable
Oh.
narrator.
Well, I
And I
mean,
don't,
essentially,
yeah,
yes.
essentially you are because that's the unreliable narrator. And it's like, I don't like that. I don't like being lied to. I would like, I understand that there are thrillers and everything, and you want to kind of like throw the reader off balance, but at the same time, I'm just like, just give me something enjoyable. There are a lot of thrillers out there that do not rely on rely on an unreliable narrator. That's a sentence. But yeah, it's like I know it's a trope right now. It's a trope that I hope burns out soonishly because I would rather be done with it. So
I
yeah.
kind of thought you were going to take that sentence in a different direction. Burns. In a certain place.
Relying on an unreliable narrator trope. There we go.
Yeah. It's funny. I remember learning about unreliable narrator when I was in, young in school in like junior high. And I thought it was just fascinating. I thought, wow, the narrator who you as a reader trust can be unreliable. What? It blew my mind.
And here's the thing. Technically, we are all unreliable narrators in some sense of the world going through our lives. We do not have 100% of the information in the world. So we will tell ourselves little lies. And, I'm okay with that in my life. I'm not okay with that when I'm trying to relax or when I'm trying to analyze something. I accept that I am not given black and white information all the time, but don't do that to me in a book.
That makes sense. I think it's fascinating having unreliable narrators. But in real life, I cannot handle if people lie, even if it's a white lie.
Exactly.
I'm like,
Yeah.
absolutely not.
Yeah. I'm like, no.
Yeah. It's interesting what we can handle in a book versus real life and vice versa.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because like I think there are some people in life in general who really are unreliable narrators who really do see themselves as a good person and everything, but in the end they aren't. And I can take that as a part of reality, but if I'm reading a book, I don't want reality. I think it's also why I read so little of just like the plain literary genre in general. I have to have it spiced with something. Like I'll read magical realism. And that's like the closest I feel that I get to like real world type fiction, unless I'm reading John Irving, because he kind of skates around in the real world a lot, depending on the book that you're reading. But there's so much reality around us right now because we do live in the real world. I rather have my books to escape into.
What is a book that you read where it really took you by surprise? Like you weren't sure you were going to like it, or, it went in a way that you didn't expect, but you were surprised pleasantly.
In the past couple of years, it was The Very Secret Society of Irregular Witches, which was a nice little found family type of a novel, romance genre. I did, and it got like all this hype. It was like being blown up with hype. I did not expect much out of it. And I was very pleasantly surprised with the writing, the characters, how she wove like all this together because it was very much our real world in I think it was set in the UK in England, but it was very much real world with heavy doses of magical fantasy. And it surprised me how well it took. And another book that kind of threw me off my paces was The Book of Magic by Alice Hoffman. It's the second book in the Practical Magic series if you're doing it by publication. And the reason why that surprised me is because I have a rule with authors. I give them a 2-book try. If I don't like their first book, I'll be like, okay, let me go find their backlist. Let me see what their second novel is going to be. I always give authors a 2-book try before I'm just like, I'm not going to try anymore. With Practical Magic, I am such a huge fan of the movie that I couldn't get through the book. I did power through, but I kind of really disliked it. And then I'm like, okay, 2-book try. Let's try book 2, which is Book of Magic. And it's about the aunts. And that book was spectacular because the way that she wrote back when she did Practical Magic versus the way that she did now, there was so much growth that it knocked me out of my chair. It knocked it out of the park. Like, that was perfect. And I also feel that you can read that book without having read Practical Magic and you will feel like you know everything. It's like, but yeah, so that just knocked me out of my chair because it was like, wow, this is such an amazing growth from like this one book that I didn't like. And now I have this book over here and I really, really liked it. I think those are really the 2 really big books that surprised me. One is a TikTok darling, and the other one is just basically from an established author. But those are the 2.
Yeah. Well, you brought up such a great point where an author, if they have several books out, one could be right up your alley and the other one could be just not your taste at all. And it's so important to really go in open-minded.
Yeah. And also because it's like, the way that there's a lot of authors right now who write for a variety of ages. One of my favorites, Victoria Schwab, she writes middle grade, she writes YA, and she does adult. And her middle grade series is really good. But I could also see myself not being a fan of it because I am not the age audience. And nobody should go into a middle-age book or a YA book expecting it to 100% cater to you, because guess what? If you are over the age of 21, you are out of the YA category. I'm sorry to break it to all your listeners, but you are. So that said,
louder for those in the back.
Yes, exactly. But yeah, so it's basically like you have to go in with an open mind that this book might not be for you because of the age, but if you like something in that book, there's like this one little thing that you liked, see if they have a book in a different age setting. See if they have adult. See if they have a young adult. Because it is possible the reason you did not like that book is because you were not the audience due to your age.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's just like if you're 12 trying to read an adult book. Like, it doesn't work. It doesn't work.
I will push back on that because I was 12 when I first read Stephen King, or I was like around that age group when I read Stephen King for the first time. So I'm going to push a little bit back on that. But otherwise, I agree with you.
Well, I mean, some kids can handle adult books, but you know what I mean? Like,
I do know what you mean.
Yeah, when it's not the target audience,
yeah,
you know.
And I am so happy that we have grown to this place in publishing where there is so much diversity between the ages. Because I remember when I was a kid back in the dark ages, you know,
I was right there with you.
Yeah, we did not really have that. If you kind of wanted teen stuff, you read Sweet Valley High. Mm-hmm. Or you read you read the Boxcar Children, and you read something like that did not really grow all that well. So I am so happy there is such this range now where we have great middle-age fiction, we have great YA fiction, you can go and pick out a mystery, a fantasy, just regular fiction, and because we have this great spectrum of readers now. Mm-hmm. And so I'm really glad that it has grown that much since when I was a kid. And it was basically, you can read, you can read Sweet Valley High, or you can read Stephen King, and there's no middle ground.
Yeah, really.
Because I did read Stephen King. I read, like when I was a teenager, it was Stephen King, it was Michael Crichton, it was V.C. Andrews, which I got completely out of my system as a teenager. Yeah. That was in my high school library, by the way. I don't understand that, and I bet it's not there anymore. But that's how the dark ages were.
I remember really struggling when I was 11, 10, 12, finding things to read. Even with my parents taking me to regular trips to the library, and then I had the school libraries and whatnot, like I would just like scour my like boxes of books in my family's home. Or I remember reading Ernest Hemingway's Old Man and the Sea very young, because it was like, well, there's nothing else to read.
Yeah.
Or my parents like buying me books, and I'm like, I don't want to read these books. Or I'd read like Fear Street, which I actually really loved, Fear Street novels and Goosebumps and stuff, but you age out of that. And then so I it was weird, because I would turn to classics. Like I was reading Shakespeare when I was like 9 and loving it. But like, who does that? Who reads Shakespeare at age 9? Not too many people, right? Not too many people.
I remember I was just out of middle school. It was the summer between middle school and high school. And during that summer, I read, like, I completed The Hunchback of Notre Dame. I read a good majority, if not completely finished, Three Musketeers. I was reading The Count of Monte Cristo, because that's what you did. You read the classics. I mean, that was like, and I mean, I read a lot of Dickens when I was younger, to the point where I'm just like, oh, I gotta go through Dickens again. But yeah, it's like, when I was younger, I loved Sherlock Holmes. That was one of my first things. I didn't know it at the time, but that was one of the first big fandoms that I really loved. I was reading Sherlock Holmes from a young age, and my favorite story of that to this day is The Hounds of the Baskervilles.
That is a good one. That is a classic.
It is so good. I love it. And I find that even though BBC Sherlock and Elementary both tried to do it, nothing is as good as the original. Really. Yeah. The original is just such a classic. They've tried, but it's just so good.
Oh, I do want to backtrack a little bit. There were some authors that I really clung to in my younger years. Bruce Coville, he wrote fantasy books and scary stories. And then, of course, Boxcar Children, the classics.
What's really funny is that, other than ElfQuest, which is a comic series by Richard and Wendy, it's PINI. And it's basically like, just Google ElfQuest comic reader, and you can find like all the back issues of it if anybody's interested. But I didn't really get into, and like Tolkien and Narnia, but I didn't really get into like fantasy until I was in college. Like, I read Stephen King's Firestarter, and I read Eyes of the Dragon, which that's still one of my favorites to this day as well. I didn't really get into reading the Dragonlance novels and the bigger, I want to say, like Last Unicorn, which is Peter S. Beagle, and like the bigger, like, known fantasy stuff. I didn't really start reading that until college. That's when I really like dove into the idea of reading fantasy.
It's weird. I read fantasy when I was younger, and then after that I got away from it.
Yeah, and see, my fantasy when I was younger was Narnia and Tolkien, which explains a lot if you think about it.
I could never get through the Tolkien stuff. And
I love it. Here's the funny thing. The Hobbit is not my favorite. I am very much a Lord of the Rings Tolkien fan. I still have not completely gotten through the Silmarillion. And I have like the Lost Tales and everything else, but I just love reading the Lord of the Rings trilogy, which was supposed to be one book, and I have it bound in one book because I am that geek who has multiple copies of Lord of the Rings. I just really loved reading the stories and then sitting there and reading the appendixes and just like diving into this fantasy world that had like these songs and all of this lore tied up into it. But yeah, I didn't start getting into lighter fantasy until college. Like, when you think about fantasy, there are like great works out there, and I admit that. Like, there's Bryan Sanderson, who is doing a hell of a job on the heavy yet accessible fantasy, because Tolkien is heavy fantasy. Let's just admit that. Tolkien was great. He was a genius. But if you want a heavy fantasy novel, not just literally, but through all the themes and everything else, you go to Tolkien. I didn't like get into like and I say lighter fantasy more as a description. It is not to say that it is easier. It is not to say that it is not as good, but it is more accessible. And I think we are coming into an age as well of fantasy being a lot more accessible, which is why there's a lot more out of it into the world and a lot more fantasy readers, and I'm here for it. And it's also why we have romantasy, which is romantasy fantasy like smushed together, because
Say that 5 times fast.
romantasy, 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 romantasy. Oh, but yeah, it's just and now like the ghost of Sarah J. Maas, not the ghost, but the presence of Sarah J. Maas will appear somewhere in my life.
There you go.
But yeah, it's like I'm glad that we are coming into this time where fantasy is being celebrated, and I yeah, it's just great.
Yeah. If you had to, you're gonna hate me for this. If you had to pick just one fantasy series to take with you on an extended vacation, what would you pick?
Okay, so you said series. So there is an obvious answer, and that's because there's 50 million books in that obvious answer. And see what I was just talking about for that. But I think what I would have to do is I think I would want to take, and I say this for the joke that I'm also going to make about it. See, because I want to say Lord of the Rings, because Lord of the Rings has everything. But if I'm going on a cruise and I want to stay away from people, and I know that I want to read it because I've only read the first book of it, and just in case the ship crashes or something and I'm alone on a desert island and I need fuel, I want to take Game of Thrones.
You would have a lot of kindling.
I know. It's like I would have so much kindling. I wouldn't be ashamed of it or anything like that. So that's why it's like, for enjoyment factor, 1, but enjoyment plus not really caring if I destroyed the book. It's like, but yeah, it's like that is just an insanely hard question. So I don't know, because it's like yeah. Actually,
I mean, you could eventually return home to all your books.
I'm actually returning home to all of my books. I still think I would take Game of Thrones, because when I get horribly depressed by it, it would make me go interact with other people.
There you go. You're trying to cover all your bases.
I really am, because, and also, I really only have read the first book of Game of Thrones, or A Song of Fire and Ice, which is, I think Game of Thrones is titled the first book, and they've just kind of meshed over the years in my head. I basically have read recaps of the show in order to understand what my friends were talking about.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that the show and the book are different, but I really would like to read them before the next book comes out. And I think I have like a lot of time. That is a really hard one. Okay, serious answer. Serious answer. I do think I would take Elf Quest with me. It's not like really a novel, but I'm also like, the heck with it. Comics, graphic novels is still a novel. It's got novel in the title. It's still a book. So I think I would, for my true honest answer, I would take Elf Quest, because I grew up with it. It's one of my favorites. I go back and reread it at least every other year, if not every year. So we'll go with Elf Quest.
Elf Quest. Excellent. We're going to switch gears and go into questions about writing. And because we each have beta read each other's stuff, this is going to be a different question than I've ever asked. What is something that you admire about my writing? And I'm going to tell you something I admire about your writing.
What I admire about your writing is I really love your characters. I really do. I'm like, you and I both know that I am not a big romance reader. It's not one of my genres that I would willingly pick up or anything. But the way that you write your characters, they feel real. They feel like I want to root for them. I want them to get their happy ending. I hate seeing them struggle. It's like I want to just give them a hug sometimes with what you put them through. But it is very much your characters, because you write these wonderful, realistic people that I'm like, damn, I wish I could know this person in real life. And I kind of do, because I know you. So
there you go.
Yeah, I would say that it's definitely your characters.
You're going to make me cry.
Oh,
It's the sweetest thing. What I admire about you is your amazing imagination. I can't write fantasy to save my life, and you do fantasy and magical realism and speculative fiction in ways that are so innovative and so entertaining. And even if you only sprinkle a little bit of like magical stuff in something, it's just so well done, whatever level you, whether it like an intensity or a spice level, but for magic, whatever you do, it's so thorough and so well done, whether it's done from a subtle aspect or whether it's like a full-blown fantasy aspect that you're doing. And it's just, I just love it, and I admire it so much, because I'm like, I can't do it. I don't understand how people do it, and you just do it really well with such a great range. So,
well, thank you.
Now we're both gonna cry, and
yeah, no, we're just gonna take this little next segment and just cry it out.
Although, follow-up question: Do you because you mentioned my characters, I'm just terribly curious. Is there a specific character that you just love more than others?
Okay, so I'm horrible with names, but it's your main character in the one where she's getting, it's either her master's or a PhD in astronomy.
Oh yeah,
And she's losing her sight.
Yeah,
I love that one. That is one of my favorites. I know it's also like the first, I feel like it's like either one of the first or like maybe the second thing I ever beta read for you. But that one is my favorite. I love her.
Me too.
And I want her to succeed. Damn it.
Yeah, that's a good one. I need to return to that one, actually.
Please return to that one. I think other people would love to read her story.
Oh, you're so sweet. And again, speaking of writing, what is something that you love about your own writing?
Oh boy. What? See, this is a hard question. And it's a hard question because, like all writers, I am so deeply critical of myself. I know you are all, everybody else is like going, no, 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 I'm not critical of my writing. Yes, you are. Yes, you are. You are lying to yourself. There is something that you hate about your writing and you nitpick it to death. And I think I'm getting better at it. I really am. But I hate the fact that I really cannot describe things well. I try my darndest, but I'm working on my it's either white box or white room syndrome, which is basically, you know, you have a character go into a space and then you don't describe it, so it's like they're in a white room or a white box, or that's like really simplification, and I don't think it's the right definition, but that's how
I know
I
what
hear
you're
it in my
talking
head.
about, though.
Yeah, you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
And other writers probably also know what I'm talking about. But yeah, I just I am not that great at descriptions. And I'm going to segue us a little bit. And because I know, like, I kind of know why as I've been working on my writing. It is because of my eyesight. It really is because of my eyesight. For those who don't know, I have retinitis and basically, so your entire audience who don't know me, the world basically, I have a degenerative eye disease called retinitis pigmentosa. It's tunnel vision. I have about anywhere from 8 to 12% of my field vision left. I'm completely blind at night. It's called night blindness. I have glare issues, but I know that because of this, it is the reason why I have such a terrible time describing things, or like having things centered in a room correctly or something like that, or even like having characters like look one way and then look the next because of somebody else talking. And because that's how I do it. Like I look at one person, they're talking, another person starts talking, and I have to move my head depending on how far away they are. Knowing that it's kind of triggered in my own disability has really started helping not only my own writing, but also how I kind of see the world. Like, because I noticed ever since I noticed this, and I really have to start working on it, that I'm taking a lot more time to basically see a room, like see where things are. Not also so I don't run into them, but also to just kind of be like, okay, how would I describe this room to somebody else? How would I be able to say, I'm going to use my own Starbucks for this, but you go in and straight in front of you is the counter where you can order. And then off to the side is kind of like a waiting area with no chairs, but there's a ledge you can sit down at to wait for your drink. And then to your left, there's a corridor, like not really a corridor, there's a pathway between a seating area with high chairs and a long table and a cooler on the other side with a basket. And I got to remember the basket's there because otherwise I will run into the basket and it hurts. And then beyond that, there are two regular type tables with a couple of chairs. And then there's another door in the bathrooms. So that's basically the Starbucks that I always go to. But in remembering all of that and kind of like describing it as kind of like a list as I just did, I can take that list and be like, okay, let's do the flowy words. Let's add some purple into this. You always hear about purple prose.
Yeah.
Let's paint this purple. How can we paint this purple? But it just helps because I have realized it and I'm working on it. And in working on it, it makes me a better writer. And it also makes me a lot safer because then I don't run into stuff because I have run into things. It hurts. Sometimes I run into something and a couple hours later, I'm like, man, why is my arm hurting? And there's like a bruise. And I'm like, oh yeah, I ran into something. So yeah.
I appreciate your willingness to open up about your eyes and your disability and how that affects you. Does it affect your writing in any other ways, like whether it's a character development or even the pacing of what you want to get done in life?
Sometimes it does, just because there are a lot of days where it is hard for me to sit down at the computer just because my eyes will not focus. And so there are a lot of days where I'm just kind of like I'm beating my head against the wall because I want to write, I want to do something, but my eyes are just not cooperating today. And it does get annoying at times. When that happens, I try to do other things. I try to do life maintenance tasks, as I call them, which is, making a pot of oatmeal for the week, making sure that my dog's okay and everything. So I've been really trying to not beat myself up too much over it because I know that the good days will outweigh the bad.
Mm-hmm.
It never feels like that in the moment, but I know that they will in the long run. And like in my writing itself, oh my gosh, I have sometimes had to ask my friends, how the heck do you see at night? Because if there's like not a light on, I can't see anything. It's completely black. It's like there's nothing there. It's like, completely, totally blind. And so I'm like, how do you guys see at night? Can you explain this to me? Like, give me some help here. I'm trying to write something, but it's nighttime outside. What do I do? So like that's a limitation. Or and a lot of people are like, well, I don't know how to do this either. And it has nothing to do with disability, but I don't know how people ride a motorcycle. I kind of know how people drive a car just because for my own safety, I know how to operate a car in case the driver decides to have not decides to, but in case the driver has a heart attack. It's like I know basic things to keep myself safe, but there's so much I don't know as well. And I'm grateful that I have a lot of friends in my life, you included, who I can come to with these questions and be like, what am I doing here? Help me. I don't experience this in my own life. What happens here? So yeah.
Have you come across any books where there is representation of characters who have something similar to you? Have you found that representation?
I haven't read it. There is a book that had, I can't remember the book, but there is an author who has basically what I have, but it's progressing faster. And that is Jennifer L. Armentrout. Jennifer L. Armentrout. And she's most recently known for From Blood and Ash, but she does have a series where she does have a character who is very representational of what she and basically I have. But otherwise, I don't know. It seems very black and white in not only novels, but in movies and TV shows that you are either completely blind or you aren't. And I know that in some cases it is intentional because that's what like the author wanted. Like all the light we cannot see. That was very intentional on the author's part, and I understand that. But there's some other novels where I'm like, was complete blindness necessary? Or like some other movies. Like I loved it at the moment, but looking back on it now, I kind of cringe at the fact that I liked it so much. But At First Sight with, I think it was Brad Pitt. I could be completely wrong on the title, but that one, I loved it at the time. But now looking back on it, I'm just like, ooh, why did I like that so much? And then you have like these other great novels, like you have Daredevil, who is a superhero that I've kind of always felt some identification with because you basically have this, blind due to chemicals, but it gave him superpowers in a way. And it is one of the reasons why I will always completely and utterly be a fan of Charlie Cox because he went into that role and he really learned or got somebody to teach him what it's like to be completely blind because you can tell that he can't focus on, like, he'll either directly completely laser focus on a face when somebody's talking to him or he won't because he's in the alter ego role of Daredevil as Matt Murdock, and it cost him a Star Wars role because he just couldn't figure out how to not act blind in a way. And it's just, you get that. But I do wish there was more. I really wish that we can get to somewhere like it is in the deaf community, where it's understood that you have people who are completely deaf, but you also have people that are hard of hearing. You also have people that sometimes just read lips because there's a brain processing error. I wish we could get to that. I don't know what it'll take to get to that, but I hope that when I eventually get to writing some of my stories that will have that sort of representation, I can help. So, yeah.
That'd be amazing.
It would be.
I'm going to go to a less serious topic now. What are your like top 3 tropes?
Favorite tropes or hated tropes?
Ooh, let's do both.
Okay, so let's start with hated first. I'm not the biggest fan of, you know what? I had an answer to this and then it completely left my brain. So I think one of the, oh, no, here we go. I don't even really have a top 3. I just have a top 1, and that is love triangles. Here's the thing. Okay, so it can be done well. It can be done well. And I know because you made a face. You made, for all the listeners out there, she did make a face. No, but I am not the biggest fan of love triangles. And the reason why is because as I have kind of grown in a way, and that's the only way I can really explain this, I'm kind of like, why didn't they just like put aside differences and become like, a threesome? Like, it's like in this day and age, why do we still have love triangles when we have this entire spectrum of relationships and sexuality? Like, why do we still have this? And I get why we still have this because people will write the characters that they want to write and put out into the world and everything, and I respect that. But I don't like love triangles all that much. It's not my favorite. I do not like, and you do not do this, so don't think that you do. But when I'm reading like a romance book, I don't like sex for the sake of sex. I like there to be a reason. And sometimes I will, like, if there is sex for a reason and I don't feel like reading it, I will skim it or I will skip it. But I want there to be a reason. I don't just, yeah, it's like, and I don't consider myself a prude or anything like that. It's basically like, I get sex happens. It's a wonderful thing. Give me a reason. Don't give me that it's just going to happen so you can fill up pages. I want it because you're fulfilling a deep connection or because, in the moment they want to strengthen their relationship or something. Give me some emotional reason behind it. And my last trope, and I don't even really think this is a trope, it's just more the way that people write. End your damn books. Do not give me any more cliffhangers. Put your plot in one book alone. Do not give me cliffhangers. Now, cliffhangers can be amazingly well done. Neil Shusterman, when he did, it was the second book into the third book of Arc of a Sight, he did a cliffhanger, but it was a cliffhanger that was a breadcrumb. It wasn't falling off a cliff with the plot. It was more of a breadcrumb. We have to stop right here, and you will get more in a moment. And that is the way that it should be. Contain your damn plots, people. So those are my 3, well, 2 tropes in a writing habit, basically. Those are the ones that I hate the most. The ones that I do love enemies to lovers. That's like one of my most favorite. I love enemies to lovers. I love seeing that hate turn into passion and it's like it's got to be thought out. It can't just be like, oh, we had this like one great night and then, now we're lovers now. No, give me the emotional connection. It has to have that emotional connection or otherwise I'm not going to believe it.
I
Um,
just don't believe it ever. Not gonna lie.
oh, you just don't believe
I'm like, there's no way someone who irritates me that much. No. Like I can't.
about them and it softens you up and you just want to learn more and like your heart becomes much I don't know but that is one of my favorite tropes. Another one is and I another one is like and I feel this is highly appropriate because we're going into the season where I'm going to be like nearly 24/7 in this is second chance romances. I love a good second
Aww.
chance romance. And you know that Hallmark is gearing up for the holiday season, and there's going to be so many big corporate lawyer has to go home for Christmas and help save something. And it's just like
In a small town.
in a small town, and it's the guy in the flannel who they were high school sweethearts, but he wronged she wronged him, and now they're getting back together, and it's mushy and gooey, and I'm a sucker. It's one of my, and especially during the holiday season, because then it's just like, yay, they're trying again, and then they're gonna get together. It's like, yay, my heart is filled with love. It's growing 3 sizes. Yeah, that's for
And the
and
snow
then
falls just perfectly. And
the
you're like,
snow
that's
falls just perfectly down on everything. Yeah. What is the last trope that I really, really like? I can't think of any good examples for this, but I really like it when we get the guy characters who are not afraid to be emotional. Yes, because the manly thing will only get you so far. I am very much here for all the male characters who get written as either giant softies or like Grumpy the Sunshine. I love Grumpy the Sunshine, especially when they flip it on its head and she's the grumpy one and he's the big softy and sunshine and light. And there's very few and far between for those, but I'm here for it. Yeah, it's just like stuff like that. Like the fourth one is really Grumpy the Sunshine because those just make me smile. And the Brown sisters not really trilogy because each book focuses on a different sister, but those 3 books, which starts with Get a Life, Chloe Brown. Oh, so good. Just so good.
well, speaking of male characters who are in touch with their human side, what about cinnamon roll characters?
See, here's the problem. I don't fully remember what the cinnamon roll trope is. It's like I know it's a thing, and I know it's a way to describe like the male characters, but I don't fully remember what the trope is off the top of my head to be like, oh yeah, I love that. So
I mean, I'd have to look it up myself, but I think it's something like just a sweet softy,
oh yes, yeah. Give me the sweet softy, guys. Give me, yeah. I'm all for that.
Now I'm hungry.
Bonus points if they run a bakery.
Right?
I know, right? It's like give in to that. If you're going to make a cinnamon roll character and he's not owning a bakery, what are you doing with your book? What are you doing with this character?
Yes, that's right. Suddenly we have like bakers in every book. Oh goodness. So what is a piece of writing advice that you ignore and one that you always follow?
It's more that it's a recent ignoring versus I have always ignored it, but the describing your characters piece of advice. I have started to ignore that in how I am doing some of my writing unless it's truthfully needed. Just because as much as I feel people need and want description of characters, there's no plot reason. Or I'm starting to see that there's no real plot reason to have it in there unless, well, she's completely different because she has golden eyes or something like that, or her eyes are completely different than what they should be for normal, or her hair color or something. Then I can see it being relevant to the plot. But otherwise, I've started to cut it out because as much as I want to give it, as much as I want to describe and be purpley and give you all this information, it gets in the way of the plot. And I'm starting to realize that more and more. And that's not to say that I don't have like these crystal clear images of my characters in my head. But at the same time, I'm like, do I really need to give it? Do I really need to say like what this character looks like unless I truly, truly need it? And I feel like a lot of authors are slowly going in that direction. Like I'm thinking like Jim Butcher with The Aeronaut's Windglass. He did describe characters. There were character descriptions. And unless I'm remembering this wrong, because I could be, because I read it like last year and I don't really fully remember all the big plot points sometimes, but I felt like he wasn't really describing characters unless he had to. Like he had these characters that are called warrior born, which are like half human, half cat. And so we needed to know what those looked like. And we needed to know like what the cats looked like. Like describing the pets is always important to me. But I don't think unless it was needed, he was really describing the humans all that much. And then one that I always follow, it's fallen by the wayside over the years, but I'm trying to get back to it. Write every day. It is one of the ones that I always want to follow, and I recommend starting small. You know, do 100 words. Do 100 words for a month, and then up it, but up it slowly. But yeah, I mean, if you really do want to start a writing practice every day, start small. Make 100 words your minimum, your hard minimum. You can go over it, but make that your minimum. And then, yeah, because it's like the writing every day thing is extremely important. Even if you're just writing out what you want to do today in extreme details, that detail will help your description. It'll help your characterization. It'll help the cobwebs out of your way. So yeah, the write every day is something that I'm trying to get back to and something that I feel is very deeply important as a writing tip. Now, Stephen King says, I think to write either 1,000 or 2,000 words a day. Don't listen to Stephen King. I love the man. I love what he's done as an author. I love his own writing book. Don't listen to Stephen King when you're starting out a daily writing habit. Don't do it.
Yeah. That'd be a lot for people. That's like 4, 5, 6 pages a day.
It is. It is a ton of, and especially if you are just starting out writing and you're like, damn, I really want to write. I have this great idea. And you're sitting in the blank page, fear, phobia, something like that's real. Even I have experienced it and I've written a lot. I still experience it. And so, yeah, just 100 words. And you know, if that 100 words is your to-do list down to like preheating the oven and what temperature you need to put the meat in and everything at, that's fine. Just start the habit of writing every day.
Speaking of writing every day, I'm actually thinking of getting back into just journaling. Are you a journal person?
I want to get back to it as well. And actually, there is a planner called the Always Fully Booked Planner, which is actually a bookish planner. And it's to help you get to your writing goals. And I have ordered the horizontal version. I am going to be using it for journaling because I am very much when I really want to seriously journal, I need a pen, I need paper, and I need to just like write it out. But yeah, I used to journal. I kept a 5-year journal for nearly a year, and then I kind of stopped. And I would love to get back to it. And I think this baby step of doing it in this format first, and then buying a 5-year journal starting in 2025 is a much nicer goal. And it's also just the way that my brain works because it's like, I was thinking of getting a 5-year journal, and then my brain was like, but it'll be 24 to 29. That doesn't look good.
My brain works that way too. I'm really glad that you like to line those things up.
Like it doesn't make sense. Like when I was writing my 5-year journal before, it was 2016. And then so it's 2016 to 2021. Or maybe I started it in 2025, but it was in the middle of the year and just felt off. Now that's not to say that you can't start a new habit in the middle of the year. You do not have to wait for January 1st. And I actually do not recommend waiting for January 1st. you should start before. Like if you realize that you have a New Year's goal, like let's say you want to start exercising next year because that's like a common New Year's thing. Start December 1st. Start December 1st, doing it once a day. Build up to twice, build up to 3 times. When you hit January 1st, you have that structure and you can just continue on with it. And then you can just like be like, yes, I'm doing it. I'm going to continue to do this. And you have a much higher success rate. And it has been proven. And I feel like I read it in either Atomic Habits or maybe his website or somewhere out in the universe that is the interwebs. There is this advice. I cannot take credit for it. I just can't remember where I heard it first.
Yeah, I remember seeing that, and that is such great advice because you don't, what's the point of waiting? Like the whole point of a habit and starting new things that are healthy for you and good for you. It's like just why not tomorrow?
Exactly. Why not tomorrow? Just start. It's going to be okay. And also, if you start before you want to really start, you have that hard deadline of wanting to start something, you allow yourself to mess up a lot more.
Yeah.
And you give yourself the grace to start again a lot easier if you start beforehand, because otherwise you're going to be kicking yourself and you are less likely to restart and try again because you're like, I've already broken it. What's the point? So that's another reason.
Yeah. Excellent advice. 2 more questions before I let you go. One is, what is your favorite part of the creative process?
Oh my gosh, my favorite part is just coming up with the idea, because a lot of ideas just hit me out of left field. And a lot of other ideas are just like, what if I change something about the world? Like Mystery of the Dark is basically, what if the supernatural races were truly real? Lady of Arrows is, what if this beloved mythical figure was female instead of male? And then like other stuff is just, I want to try writing an epic fantasy. That was my first NaNoWriMo win. That was Power. Sometimes it's like, it's just the idea process is always the most fun to me. And then secondary is the planning process, like sitting down and planning out my story. I'm very much a planner. So yeah.
So I said 2 more questions, but I also want to throw in a quirky one. But
Okay.
First the serious one. Serious one. In your own words, what does living a creative life mean to you?
Oh, this is a little bit of living a creative life to me is having the space to be able to sit down and write, but also have the grace to realize that I do not live in a bubble. There are going to be things that interrupt me. There are going to be things that come before the process, before being able to sit down and write. And so I really think that a creative life is basically doing the work, but also realizing that there is truly no perfect day. You have to accept the road bumps that come into life. And there's also going to be days where you sit down to write and nothing comes, which is when you should do the elaborate to-do list, because that's what I do when writing just will not come. But yeah, it has, again, not sure where it originated, but I most recently heard it from Neil Gaiman. Sit your butt in the chair and write.
Easier said than done sometimes.
Exactly. But if you have the space and the grace to like be like, okay, well, I have to do this, this, and this before I get to write. I'm like, yeah, but you're going to get to write eventually. Focus on that and get through the other things. And then you'll feel even more grateful that you can sit down and write. So
excellent. So here is your quirky question. If you had a time capsule, what would you put in it?
Oh, I love this question. I would put in it my Kindle keyboard. It's still somewhere around here. I would put in my old Game Boy Advance that I still have. Yeah.
Classic.
With all 3 colors of Pokemon. I know. It's like I have a red. Yeah, I have blue, red, and yellow there. And then I think I would put in a newspaper from like the date that I was making the time capsule.
Ooh, I like that.
Yeah, because it would be very interesting to see how different the world changed. And even if we have newspapers when I dig up that time capsule in the future, think I would just put in, a picture of my family, and see how much that has changed as well. Who's
Mm.
gone? Who's still here? Who am I still talking to? Yeah, seriously. Our world has changed that much that you go, who lives, who dies, who the heck am I still talking to? It's a Hamilton rift of who lives, who dies, who tells your story. I think those are the things that I would put in there.
That's really nice. Any last words for the world before I let you go?
I'm just really grateful that you had me on. I really am. It's like I'm a friend with you, and I understand that I do have the privilege of being your friend and therefore being on your podcast, but I am still very grateful that you decided to have me on. So just thank you very, very much.
Well, you're welcome. It was such a pleasure. And even though we talk like daily, this is just an extra special chance to get to know you in a different way. And it was just wonderful. So I appreciate you coming on and being my guest. So
yeah, it was a lot of fun, and it was great. So thank you.
You're welcome. Listeners, please check the show notes for a brief bio about Elizabeth Szubert, and keep watching those bookshelves because she's gonna hit hard one day, and I'm so proud of her. Thanks for listening to the podcast. Like the show? Have a question? Stop by the Facebook and Instagram pages. Links are in the show notes, or search for Creative Piecemeal Podcast on social media and click follow for all the latest.